as one of my favorite artists says, I am a Roxbury girl raised in rich black soil. Because as a little girl who grew up in Roxbury, the heart of the black community here in Boston, who grew up in subsidized housing, who went to the corner store with food stamps, who was a young single mom, is now sitting in City Hall in the corner office as the first woman mayor for our city and the first black mayor. That is my story. That is a beautiful resistance.
You didn't seek this out. This isn't something you ever dreamed or imagined. What was going through your mind when it was announced that Walsh would be exiting and you would take this seat?
You know, so much, and things happened pretty quickly. So the very first thing was to make sure that I was pulling together a group of people who could help with the transition. This was not something that I saw for myself as an elected official, even after I ran for public office. It was not something that I saw for myself growing up in the city of Boston. You know, I did not see women or black people, for that matter, holding those types of positions, being mayors of cities.
To your point, you were an elected official. You were the height of the city council, which is how you inherited this office. Yet you never thought to run, despite being poured into and growing up with such a rich black history and pride of self. You still just didn't think it was possible for yourself. Why is that?
I think there is some truth, and if you see it, you could be it. And that people dream what they're exposed to. And as a little girl, during the height of the battle to desegregate Boston Public Schools, I was in that second phase in 1976, 11 years old, getting bused across town to Charlestown, a neighborhood here in Boston. Lots of racial tension, rocks being thrown at me, racial slurs being thrown at me and my classmates. Our buses often had police escorts. You know, that is the Boston that I grew up in. I grew up in a city where you couldn't go to certain neighborhoods.
How are you? There's another old school hairdresser down here, Oak Valley.
I've always seen the beauty in my neighborhood, even when others had written it off or didn't invest or tried to label it a neighborhood of crime. And I always saw the beauty in the green space and the architecture, in its people, really. That's what I think makes my neighborhood so wonderful. I think it's what makes Boston so special. It all comes down to the people. You know, I grew up seeing black leadership, but not necessarily black political leadership. I also saw the richness and the pride. I understood and knew what that meant to be a little black girl who was very proud of who she was, but it wasn't always easy.
It wasn't easy then, and it's not easy now.
Absolutely
But
not.
the narrative is that this is a white city, and it's not.
It's not.
This
It is majority people of color.
That's right.
25% black.
Why do you think that narrative continues to persist despite the rich black history here?
You know, I think in large part because of the history of busing, which is why on my very first day as mayor, it was important for me to go back to my childhood school, that middle school that I was bused to, and to, in many ways, turn the page and move on to the next chapter. It doesn't mean that, you know, my elevation as mayor has solved racial tension or certainly racial injustice We certainly have a lot more work to do, but it was important for me to go back to see, little kids who were like me, a very diverse student body who were actually studying Boston's history around busing. And so it was really a powerful moment to not only share with them my own experiences having gone through that and being a piece of living history as someone who went through that, but to then stand before them as the first woman mayor and the first Black mayor. I know we have a lot of work to do. We know that there is a racial wealth gap here in the city of Boston. We know by every measure that Black people are disproportionately impacted, whether we're talking about COVID, whether we're talking about the racial wealth gap, whether we're talking about housing, if we're talking about opportunity gaps in our schools. But I also know that we are more than a statistic and that we have made great contributions to this city and to this country.
What is it that gave you the motivation and grit and grace that once you didn't seek this office out, but once it became yours, once that chair became yours, what was it? What was the conversation you had with yourself that was like, you know what, I'm gonna fight for this seat?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of things. Certainly the conversation that I had with myself, but more important, the conversation I had with God. The conversation that I had with friends and family and people who believe in me and support me, and a deep, deep love for my city. The neighborhood in which I live, which is the neighborhood that I grew up in, and made a conscious decision to stay in my neighborhood. And it is the neighborhood that I represented on the city council. It is in many ways what I have been fighting for and what I want to see. And we have richness in Roxbury, rich, deep, deep history in terms of Black leadership, in terms of culture and arts, and it also is the place where you see a lot of the disproportionate impact in terms of some of these stats. I, understand what it is like to experience food insecurity and housing insecurity. I know what it is like to be a young single mom trying to provide good opportunities for my daughter. Those experiences and how I have been able to, despite those things, sit here on the 5th floor. I fight so hard for my city because I love my city.
It's a love language.
It is, particularly for Black women.
Ayanna Pressley, the People's Congresswoman, always says policy is a love language, and all of these acts, these radical acts, being an advocate, being an activist, moving up in political power, these are all, to me, acts of love.
And it's a language that is often misunderstood.
I hope you got that. That was kind of a breast thing. All right. All right.
When you became mayor, there was such a frenzy and excitement. It was national news, there were photo shoots, it was a big deal. Look at this office. This office is stunning, and there's Black women all over this office, powerful Black women. But there was also the backlash that always comes when Black women rise. There were people that were like, yes, first Black mayor, and then there were people that wanted to correct and be like, acting mayor, not the real mayor. Lots of arguments over what that means. What do you have to say to those critics?
I quote another Black woman, which is Alice Walker, and that is that the most common way that people give away their power is by thinking that they don't have any. And so I walk proudly in my power as mayor of Boston. I am not doing an act, I am doing the work. This is a historic moment for our city, not just in the sense that I sit here as mayor, but that this race, for the first time ever, there isn't, a front runner who is a white male. And this is a 400-year-old city almost. And for 200 years of having a mayor, the first time that there's a woman mayor and a person of color mayor, and then to not have someone who is anxious to snatch that away, I think is like, wow, here we are.
What do you want for the city?
Oh, I want, the best for my city, always. This is my home by birth, but also my home by choice. I want a future that is bright, for Black and brown kids, for all children. Despite having a lot of work to do, there's a lot to celebrate in terms of the contributions, not just of people from way back when, the young professionals who are doing amazing work now, the activists who are doing incredible work now. I have pinch me moments that I get to sit here because it isn't about Kim Janey, it isn't about a title. It has always been about the work and moving my city forward.
What gives you joy?
Oh, I get joy from my grandchildren, any child really, hearing children's laughter, working in my garden, you know, being close to the earth, being out in nature, experiencing a rainbow, the simple things in life, the things that are often missed in the hustle and the bustle of doing the work. You know, I particularly, you know, think about my grandchildren and how I want them to have memories of me and our time together that make them smile decades, you know, later when they think back of, you know, on their childhood.
To have joy.
Exactly.
Joy is important.
It's so important, particularly for us. It is deeply rooted in the Black experience, deeply rooted in what it means to be African American. You know, it is what got our people, our ancestors through, you know, slavery, people who were enslaved in this country, who held out hope despite just harsh conditions, that there was a better day coming. And there's a psalm that says, you know, weeping may endure for the night, but joy cometh in the morning.
Want to do a little exercise with me? Okay. I'm gonna close our eyes. I want you to think about the little girl raising her fist during that highway protest. And then think about the girl who was bused, among the first to desegregate schools in Boston. And now here you are on the 5th floor of City Hall in Boston, first Black person, first woman mayor. Open your eyes. Like, what, you were always, you said to me you never even thought you could be here. You never thought it was possible. You were always leading the way. That path was always being charted for you. What do you want the little Black girls who are looking at you, the way you looked at Diane Carroll, the way you lift everyone, whether it's a journalist like me who you saw in the paper and said, hey, I need to meet her, or the people in the neighborhood that you're loving on all the time. What do you want these little girls to know?
I want them first and foremost to know that all things are possible, that they can achieve, that they can do whatever they aspire to do, and they can be whoever they want to be. And I want them to have that freedom to be able to dream big. I want every little girl, quite frankly, to look at me and to be able to see a brighter day and future for themselves, and that there is a path forward